Hello guys, it's me Simo Orahara, and in this video I want to talk again about Kubo's answer, especially after what some fans brought up concerning some unclear points like Ichigo's first Zanpakuto and also Zaraki's Zanpakuto in its sheath. But first I need to clarify an important point, which is about who is the blade and who is the sheath in the case of Ichigo's Zanpakuto. Kubo's main answer was about the dual Zanpakuto of Ichigo being the correct form of his Zanpakuto, and he said that every Zanpakuto consists of a blade and a sheath, and that the two blades of Ichigo, one of them represents the blade and other the sheath. Look, I said what Kubo said, I didn't add anything, because here another kind of mystery began. Kubo never specified which blade is the blade and which is the sheath. I have the answer in Japanese, and it has never specified whether the long blade is the sword or the sheath, or the short blade is the sheath or the sword. Therefore, whether my answer or anyone else's answer is based on conclusions and not a statement from Kubo. Of course, in that video, I said that the short blade is the one that represents the blade, and I based this on several signs, such as I said, when Ichigo wanted to release the Bankai, he placed the short blade next to the long blade. And if we go back to Kubo's answer, he says that in Bankai mode, Ichigo's sword is covered with a sheath. So what I saw is that the long white blade is the sheath, so that it contains the short blade. Secondly, there is also a relationship between the short sword that represents the Osan with the name blade. For example, in the 8th volume, Kubo titled that volume under the title The Blade and Me, and of course the blade was intended for the Osan. Also in volume 61, which also carried Osan on its cover, the first chapter of that volume was also titled The Blade and Me, and that chapter was also about the Osan, I mean the old man. There is also something else that I have already said in this video. I said that the real Zangetsu is very similar to Yhwach's sword. I also said as long as the Osan is a manifestation of the shape of Yhwach 1000 years ago, and it is possible that he even took the name Yhwach, certainly he also has a copy of the sword of Yhwach, and that sword was the one that Ichigo extracted for the first time, but it wasn't contained all the Shinigami power of Ichigo. For all these points, I considered that the short blade is the blade, while the long blade is the sheath. But whether my possibility or any other possibility, they remain just conclusions, because Kubo never specified which blades are the sheath and the blade. So I wished if Kubo added another sentence to clarify this point. So this is regarding the issue of which of the two blades are the blade and the sheath. Some also talked about the issue of the first Ichigo sword in the first chapter. They said, so what about the sheath that we saw in this scene? If Kubo says that Ichigo is without a sheath, what about this one? About this question, Kubo previously answered it. In one of his old interviews, he was asked about the Zanpakuto that Ichigo was fighting with. Is it belong to Rukia? Kubo answered yes, it is. He said that the shape of the Zanpakuto belongs to Rukia's Zanpakuto. And this is evident because at that time Ichigo was using Rukia's Shinigami powers, and therefore automatically he used her Zanpakuto. And since it's Rukia's Zanpakuto, it will have a sheath. That's why this form is related to Rukia's Zanpakuto, not Ichigo's. Ichigo's true power will start with this form, and here was the first appearance of Zangetsu. And if you re-review some chapters of the Soul Society arc, you will see that all the Shinigami, whether officers, vice captains, and captains, have their sheath. And here are some pictures in front of you of different characters, and as you can see, each sheath is distinguished by size that fits the Zanpakuto. Of course, some referred to Zaraki's case. What about Zaraki? Does he have a sheath? And here again I must clarify an important point about Zaraki. As an initial answer, Zaraki has a sheath, but if we assume that Zaraki does not have a sheath, this does not make Kobo's answer a kind of contradiction, and I will explain in detail what I mean. So let's first review Nemaya's Uwitsu words when he talked about Sayafushi. He said that he couldn't make a sheath for this sword, and for that he didn't send it to Serity, meaning Nemaya can't send a sword to Serity without a sheath, and this is a fact. But here I ask this question: what kind of swords does Nemaya send to Serity? The answer is that he sends Asauchi, which are nameless Zanpakuto. That's why they don't contain any Shinigami power, so that anyone, whether a Shinigami or a soul with high spiritual power, once they get Asauchi, can make them a Zanpakuto later. Nemaya sent one of those Asauchi with a sheath to the Serity, and one of the officers got the Asauchi and its sheath, like any Shinigami in the Serity. And one of the battles, that Shinigami died, and in that period the little Zaraki came and stole the Asauchi from that dead officer. And we don't know if little Zaraki stole the Asauchi with the sheath or he did just steal the Asauchi. That's why I told you, even if Zaraki didn't have a sheath, that's not a problem, because he have stolen the Asauchi and didn't check the sheath of that Asauchi. But the truth, the sheath is a Zaraki. In his battle against Ichigo, when he was about to fight him, Zaraki took out his sword from the sheath, as you can see in this picture. That's why I think that the sheath does not have a fixed shape, because when Zaraki stole the Asauchi, he was like this, and when the Asauchi became a Zaraki, it became in this size. Therefore, there is no doubt that the sheath itself changes in size with the size of the Zanpakuto. On the other hand, about the question of Ichigo's Bankai, I think this form is Ichigo's real Bankai, because Kobo said in that answer that the Bankai of Ichigo provides the Zanpakuto the sheath, and this is what we saw at the level of the Bankai. The dual Zanpakuto became one sword with sheath. That's why I think as long as Kobo mentioned the word Bankai, he confirms that this form is Bankai. More than this, Yhwach is the only character who was able to see the power of the Bankai in the future, and based on what he saw, he decided to break it. But it seems that when the Bankai breaks, it returns to the real Zangetsu form, or the dual swords, and this remains according to Ichigo's desire, as Kobo explained. So I think the situation is as follows. This Zanpakuto is the real Zangetsu, but without full powers, because the Osan was holding it back, and the real Zangetsu doesn't have a sheath. Then we come to the dual Zanpakuto, and here the Zanpakuto is in the correct form. A Zanpakuto consists of a sheath and blade. We don't know whichever represents the blade in the sheath, and I'm talking here on the level of the Shikai. At the Bankai level, Tensa Zangetsu makes Ichigo Zanpakuto covered by sheath, and if the sheath is broken, Ichigo will absorb that sheath and return to the Shikai mode. He may return to the true Zangetsu form with its full power, or the dual Zanpakuto, and in the end is Ichigo who has the choice to make Zangetsu in the dual form or the real Zangetsu. But I think he likes to fight with one sword, that's why he made Zangetsu in this form. So in the end, guys, I hope Kobo retracts his decision in which he said that he will not bring up this issue again, because we need an accurate explanation of this point, and it should be in the anime. So guys, this is my video for today about this topic, and see you guys in my next video.